Hello and welcome to the Intellect's Cove. I'm Colin Fairley. I'm a pragmatist philosopher and political theorist based at Queen's University in Canada. And in this video, I'm going to complete the 3-video installment of Chapter 5 of my book, Aging and the Ethics of Longevity Science. Chapter 5 is Public Health Must Transcend, Folkbiology. I identify 3 distinct folkbiological premises that inform the original orientation towards waging a war against disease that we find in early 20th century public health pioneers. In 2 previous videos, I addressed premise number 1 of folkbiology, that is, that disease is unnecessary and health is the normal condition of the human mechanism. That, I argued, has some plausibility if we ignore the post-warranty period of the human lifespan, which now more portions of the global population are surviving to. The second premise was that we could only target the extrinsic morbidity and mortality risk factors, such as unhealthy environments and lifestyle, rather than the evolutionary causation of our vulnerability to disease in late life, which is the evolution of senescence itself. And in this final video, I'm going to unpack a third premise that I contend is present in the original orientation towards public health when the steamship of modern public health was developed, that biological aging is universal and that chronological aging is a template for biological aging, though these two things are distinct with important implications for the health of aging populations. So just to recall that folk biology is our understanding of the biological world. It's usually rudimentary. There may be inchoate elements of more sophisticated political concepts. And in the previous videos, I made the case that there both was some that the war against disease both abated prominent folk biological premises of the early 20th century, but it also perpetuated its own folk biological beliefs because it did not have a more developed understanding of the biology of aging and how that implicates the health prospects of aging populations. When the ship's captain oriented the steamship of public health towards eradicating diseases, it wasn't clear on what that would entail for the future. And the hope was that as you eradicated diseases, populations would just survive with healthy life expectancy until they died. And, writing in the early 1900s, Winslow did not have insights from geriatric medicine and gerontology concerning what occurs in the upper bounds of human longevity, and that waging wars against diseases would be increasing survival time, but not increasing health span. And so the growing gap between lifespan and health span was exacerbated because of the myopic viewpoint of the war against disease frame. And this has significant real-world applications for how we undertake biomedical research. I argued in previous videos that the war against disease orientation was foundational to the creation of the National Institutes of Health, which really are institutes of disease, and the CDC itself, and that this is partly responsible for the exacerbation of the gap between health span and lifespan, because these institutions prioritize waging wars against disease rather than promoting healthy longevity. We now see in the United States a gap of nearly 12 and a half years between health span and lifespan. And this can be redressed if we reorient ourselves towards pursuing rate control and relax our prioritization of the ideals of disease control. Right, so the presupposition of the original war against disease that Winslow was envisioning in the early 1900s was that you would shield the population from the extrinsic mortality risk factors, right? So one of these risk factors would be smallpox and polio, malaria, dysentery. And as you did that, the population would be able to survive into later life and then they would die. But there was little detail provided by Winslow about what occurs in the latest stages of the human lifespan. And that's what I want to unpack now to show that there was some presumption that, well, everybody ages at the same rate. And so once the life course is ended, we simply die. And that turned out not to be the case. Though when Winslow was writing in the early 1900s, he wouldn't have had access to a more biologically accurate picture of what occurs to human populations surviving past the sixth and seventh decade of life, given the high rates of early life mortality that were predominant during the time that he was writing. So here is the passage I want to unpack. I call this Winslow's candle analogy, and it really illustrates how the original orientation of the war against disease functioned from a very primitive understanding of what occurs in late life. I'll just read this passage and then I'm going to unpack it in a little bit more detail. The flame, as it catches, flutters feebly so that the least breath will quench it. And again, when burned almost to the socket, it flickers and goes out easily. So the beginning of life for children, there's a high vulnerability to infectious disease mortality. And then at the later stages of the human lifespan, again, for older persons with a diminished immune system, they too are very vulnerable to mortality from pneumonia, for example. Thus, the body which in midlife may bear the severest shocks of sickness and privation, in infancy and old age succumbs to but slightly unfavorable conditions. The extinction of life at the end of its natural cycle, after the course has been finished and the allotted work done, can scarcely be regretted, but the lives cut off well before they have begun are an absolute loss to the community of the extent to which most of us have little conception. Right, now this passage, I have mixed reactions to this passage. I certainly agree with Winslow's overall conjecture that death for a 7-year-old is a gross tragedy that should be abated. But the idea that there's nothing regrettable that occurs when people are dying in the later stages of the human lifespan really depends on the details of what's occurring. And at best, Winslow is giving us a very skewed, idealistic account of what occurs, that you live your healthy lifespan and then you simply die. But because of the gap between lifespan and healthspan, there is a lot that can be regretted and that we lose when we extend the duration of time. People must survive managing the multimorbidities of advanced age. And so that is going to be the foundation of my critique. And his presumption that everybody, assuming that people are saved from early life mortality, that they biologically age at the same rate. And so chronological aging is a proxy for biological aging. And when the lifespan reaches its upper bounds, we simply pass away peacefully. So the two things that we see Winslow noting, which is empirically apt, is that in infancy and in old age, because of a weakened immune system, the young and the older persons are much more vulnerable to infectious disease mortality. It's the valuation of this section here that I want to focus on. The extinction of life at the end of its natural cycle, after the course has been finished and the allotted work done, can scarcely be regretted. Now, if it were the case that we just remained healthy our whole life until we died, then this would have plausibility. But what Winslow could not anticipate and did not anticipate is that waging wars against disease would increase lifespan but not increase healthspan. And so the growing gap between lifespan and healthspan means that we don't simply die when the allotted work is done with nothing to regret. There is a lot to regret when people survive well beyond the health span. And that is what I'm going to unpack in this chapter. And I will argue should be foundational to our aspirations about what medical science can deliver for today's aging populations. All right, so in particular, what Winslow was not able to predict would be a consequence of waging wars against disease is that our success in delaying mortality into later and later ages came at a cost of exacerbating the gap between health span and lifespan. So older persons do not just suddenly pass away peacefully in their sleep at the end of the health span when the natural cycle has expired. Many people survive for many years managing illness and frailty in late life. And as noted in previous videos, the lifespan health span gap is nearly 10 years, and it's longer for women. And so really one wants to address the realities of what older populations face in a scenario where we simply fixate on trying to treat and eliminate each disease of aging, pushing mortality into older age cohorts, rather than aspiring to target the rate of biological aging itself to increase the health span and narrow and compress the period of morbidity, disease, and frailty in late life. Furthermore, there are other components that, again, Winslow, writing in the early 1900s, could not have anticipated concerning the costs of managing the chronic conditions more prevalent in late life. This is an extremely expensive endeavor, and our healthcare systems, which are limited, are strained as we try to extend lifespan further via the route of managing multimorbidity in late life. Furthermore, there's the greenhouse gas emissions from the world's healthcare systems, which itself exacerbates the health vulnerabilities of the global population surviving into late life from the health risks of a warming planet. So there's a whole variety of things that Winslow did not anticipate that would be regrettable circumstances in an aging world where the orientation towards simply trying to conquer each disease one at a time, his protean approach to public health, exacerbates these vulnerabilities. And finally, Winslow also neglects the reality of the caring responsibilities that occur in late life. Again, people don't just do their allotted work and then pass away peacefully. There's often a period of managing declining health, the onset of dementia, Alzheimer's, and the majority of this caregiving responsibilities, as we'll see in Chapter 7, are taken up by daughters because of the legacy of patriarchal practices. So again, there is a lot that is regrettable about what occurs in late life because of the disparity between health span and lifespan. And so while I agree with Winslow that the death from infectious disease mortality among the young is definitely morally regrettable, I disagree with his presumption that nothing regrettable occurs when people die in later life. There's a lot of detail that is left out about the growing disparity between health span and lifespan and the pressure that puts on healthcare systems, on caring responsibilities, and on the patients who must manage multimorbidity for, in some cases, over a decade of the last stage of the lifespan. So the idea that the extinction of life at the end of its natural cycle, when the work is done, can scarcely be regretted is an idealized vision of what occurs as populations survive. I mean, in an ideal world, yes, we'd remain healthy until the end of life. I mean, death is inevitable. But what Winslow failed to anticipate, and why the orientation towards only pursuing the ideal of disease control, is its failure to anticipate the onset of the multimorbidities of late life and the growing gap between health span and lifespan. And this is why in the tale of the journey through the ocean of longevity, the ship's captain, who initially believes that they can just continue on the course of the war against disease, fails, has to pivot towards a wisdom oriented approach to biomedical research to improve the quality of life for the passengers on the steamship of public health, rather than simply pursuing the short-sighted aspiration to delay mortality into later and later ages. So one of the presumptions of Winslow is that chronological aging is synonymous with biological aging, right? That the presumption is that people would live to the age at which the allotted work is done and die, and that the lifespan also approximates the health span. But both of these things, we now know with the benefits of a century of research on geroscience, that both of these things are distinct. Everyone chronologically ages at the same rate. Chronological aging is a human construction. We have 12 months in a year, so every year we get a candle on our birthday cake. But the rate of biological aging is variable. And some people biologically age slower, some faster. And lifespan, the amount of time we can survive, is also distinct from the health span, the period in which we are in relatively good health. And this has serious implications for our ideals of medical science in an aging world. With respect to the reality of biological aging having such a variation, right? Some adults biologically age at a slower rate than the average person. For example, centenarians and supercentenarians have a significant health advantage over the average person. Now, these individuals are very rare, but not only do they enjoy more years of life, they also experience a compression of morbidity in late life, right? So if Winslow's conjecture in his candle analogy was referring simply to centenarians and supercentenarians, right? If all of us could live a century of disease-free life, and then when our health diminishes, it's a quick descent to passing, then that would actually have a lot more appeal. But what Winslow could not anticipate is the reality that the vast majority of the population do not age like centenarians or supercentenarians. The onset of disease occurs earlier, and there's a bigger gap between health span and lifespan for the average person. So, for example, obesity is a form of accelerated aging, and it will reduce both the lifespan and the health span of some adults. In a future chapter on the intersectionality of biological aging, I will provide a more up-to-date view of the various factors that influence the rate of biological aging. These include not only genetics, but our exposure to various environmental factors and discrimination. There's sex differences in aging. And so the candle analogy that Winslow provides is an overly simplistic account of what occurs in late life for people. People do not biologically age in identical fashion. There's a large variation. So it's not only, the inequality between dying as a child and dying in late life that medical science should seek to abate, but also the inequality that exists between those rare individuals who can survive a century of disease-free life with the average person who will experience the onset of multimorbidity after the 7th decade of life. And so here is an illustration that I would advance to give us a much more accurate understanding of this intersectionality of the rate of biological aging. So the health span is influenced by both the genome and the exposome, and the interdependence between these two things. This is really where the action of the epigenetics of aging is. So many of the things identified as traditional preventative medicine, such as exercising and diet and the social determinants of health, matter not only because they help reduce mortality, but they interact with our genes to influence our biological resilience to the onset of disease, frailty, and disability in late life. So all of those features of the exposome interact with our genetics And then they can either be accelerating or decelerating the rate of biological aging. And I have at the bottom an orange circle over the experimental arm of translational gerontology. This is the innovation and rate of aging control, the development of potential drugs that will target the mechanisms of aging to help boost our biological resilience to the onset of disease, frailty, and disability in late life. So that was covered in the third video that I did on chapter 4, the geroscience hypothesis, a century in the making. And so that is like on the cusp of becoming a reality. It's still more in the speculative, aspirational feature of rate control, but I argue it should be prioritized as a critical feature of trying to promote the ideal of healthy longevity. So that concludes what I want to say about chapter 5. Just in this third final video, Winslow's characterization of what happens once you abate early life mortality risk factors was too simplistic and idealized. It left out all the critical details about what's going to occur in later life and a growing gap between lifespan and healthspan as people are managing multimorbidity, the strain that will place on healthcare resources, the impact that will have on planetary health, and the burden that will create for most of the daughters of the world who will have to take on the lion's share of caring responsibility for their aging parents. So we need more biologically accurate ideals about what we should be pursuing in an aging world, and rate control, I contend, provides us with that ideal. Ideally, we're increasing healthspan and compressing morbidity in late life. In the next chapter, I will do a deep dive into the war on cancer, where I will again illuminate what I take to be the shortcomings of fixating only on the ideal of disease control and neglecting the ideals of rate control.